Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, TSTV channel 347. Let's go back a few weeks ago. Questions were raised about media integrity in South Africa after revelations that the Sunday Times and the Citizen initially failed to disclose their trip to Israel, which had been paid for by the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Now, according to the press code, which both publications subscribe to, newsrooms are required to declare when outside organizations fund their reportings. Critics say the omission was no oversight, but a deliberate attempt to obscure who was behind the coverage, a move that risks eroding trust not only in those papers, but in South African journalism as a whole. We go back a few nights ago, the SABC conducted an interview with Dr. Mampela Rampela. And of course, a question was asked with regards to, is there a genocide that is happening in Gaza? Whereas the host said that you could not compare the genocide to the Holocaust, which the Nazis perpetrated in World War II. Where is South African media with regards to the coverage of the genocide? Joining me now, I'd like to welcome an individual who penned an article with regards to this. He's no stranger to us at Hilaal TV. He's a Palestine Solidarity Alliance member, Hassen Lorgat. Hassen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Always good having you on.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Hassen, let's go to a few nights ago. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign, of course, had written an open letter to the SABC with regards to this. Public broadcaster, one would expect there to be a sense of bipartisan aspects to it. What was it that disappointed not only the PSA but also the PSC?
Yeah, I think this is our Cape Town comrades, the PSC, who've taken issue, but amongst many other people, they've taken issue with the way the body language, the tone, and the anger that the host seems to suggest to the guest in the program. And it's not so much that there was a discussion about the Holocaust, and she was so invested in it, as if, you know, this irked her very being. And as she was trying to imply, the SABC host, imply that Dr. Mampele was actually undermining the victims of the Jewish Holocaust, she ignored the fact that by her approach, she was undermining the ongoing Holocaust, the ongoing genocide against Palestinians. So I really think that the fact that she's now being suspended or cautionary suspension or whatever is but a tip of the problems in the SABC. And I want to relate it to the other things that you've spoken about. You know, when I took up the matter with the support of a number of solidarity groups, but as a media activist, essentially, I took the case against the Sunday Times, the Citizen, and Biz News. And I argued, as you rightfully point out in your introduction, that editorial staff, you know, two of them in the Sunday Times, one in the Citizen, and one Alec Hogg in Biz News, have over 90 years experience, 90 years. And you don't make this mistake if you are 90 years in journalism. So this is a fundamental problem. In fact, what we also try to show is that there was collusion amongst these three not to indicate who funded them. The fact that they were caught out, they eventually admitted. But the press council has to, as I've been insisting, has to investigate collusion, conspiracy. And it's not that they don't have the capacity, because when you do this in financial matters, you can see that. Financial journalists will have to account for this kind of thing. They have the capacity for this kind of thing. So for me, the question of the journalists being rude to a guest is a small part of the problem. The SABC, in this case, let's talk about them, but we have to mention ENCA, Prime Media, all do not want to discuss the corrupting of our media. Why? Why? Is it that they fear that their journalists are corrupt? I'm not so sure. What are the pressures that these other organizations are putting on the public broadcaster? So it's a second violation of media freedom when the major public broadcaster in the country, one that has got millions and millions of listeners and viewers, does not want to touch the story. And this is the scandal that we are discussing. So the journalist being rude to Rampele, doctor, is a small part of it. The big parties, they are fine to discuss. There was a bombing there, someone died, got killed. Yeah, Israel is accused there. But when you come home and you deal with the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, an affiliate of the South African Zionist Federation, you actually rattle power. And this is where the SABC dispute is currently at. We've written to the board, we've written to some of the stations. We want answers to why this happened. And it's a more structural concern that we have. Reprimanding one journalist, re-educating them, showing them the text that a genocide doesn't require numbers. It doesn't have to be 1 million. You can wipe out people culturally, economically, medically. They're doing everything. And even Israeli scholars have admitted what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza, is a Holocaust, is a genocide.
Hassen, I have to come into this here. So you've put this long article in Muslim Views. I wanted to get, when somebody conducts a trip to, for example, any country, and it's sponsored by the lobby group of that country, of course you're going to get a one-sided fact-finding mission. Even MPs, for example, earlier this year, took a trip to Israel, and of course we're going to get one-sided opinions, or as they would say, facts. So surely the journalists that were going to Israel, we're going to get one-sided fact-finding missions because they're going into Israel. It's all lovey-dovey over there. Nothing is wrong. The tour guides or the tour operators, whoever's facilitating them, will say, well, there's no apartheid that is happening. Meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, the Knesset has passed a motion to annex the entire land. And going to Gaza, there is a genocide that is happening. It's quite clear for everyone to see.
I think what your question is alluding to is that we are spending, and I'm hoping I'm wrong here, we are discussing how the journalists, whose role in terms of the press code in the society is to keep a check on power. But if they are compromised, if they are bought, in fact, not only bought, but eating from the same pot.
No, but that's why I want to come in. I said they are compromised because they are being backed by these lobby groups that are supposedly asking for there to be a propaganda that is being mentioned on the country. That's quite clear.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying to you, when the journalists are compromised, right, you can see why they don't keep the politicians who are also eating from the same Zionist pot accountable. So let me make it simpler. Is that during the months of April and May, you had journalists going over to do stories. Around about the same time, around about April, you had 15, they say 9 to 15 politicians from ACDP, DA, Patriotic Alliance, all going over, even meeting the president of Israel, right? They came back, these politicians, saying, in a one-sided fact investigation, some of them said they went for tourism, religious tourism, others said they went just for, I don't know what it is, but they all came back hiding the fact that it was sponsored by the South African Friends of Israel, a Zionist-affiliated body. So the two, the journalists and the politicians, were eating from the same pot. Little wonder the journalists in this matter cannot keep the politicians accountable because they are compromised. But what we are doing here is far deeper. We're saying the journalists have to come clean so that they can do their role in society. So in the dispute, before it's now on the final leg of arbitration at the press council, the citizen replied to say, we went on this trip. We admitted we went afterwards. Of course, we do. However, deny that such contribution slanted the citizens' reporting in any way. We also place on record that reporting was not unfair. That's what they said, right? In their reply to the Ombudsman last week, right? I then wrote a reply to say, after consulting with campaigners and others, that we believe that whatever the citizen has done, the citizen in private has written to a campaign group in KZN, and it says that they've spoken to their staff, and this is what they said. The Citizen will no longer send anyone on sponsored trips to Israel. This is because these trips, being stage managed and carefully curated, deliberately only portray one side of the story. It is not possible to cover the other side because on these trips, journalists are restricted in where they can go and who they can talk to. No professional journalistic job can be done on such trips. So you have the deputy editor saying this to Fatima Musa in KZN. And then in the letter to me, they say, there was no unfairness. So I brought this out and said, but here's the barakat for you. We're not going to go for you because you've admitted, and I put it publicly now, and I repeat it every chance I get. So the truth is, they recognize that they've compromised themselves, but they don't have the courage to admit it in an open forum, because what we're asking for redress is a public discussion. The things you are hosting here, to be hosted by all of us in a hall, to say this is what we did wrong, and this is how we can fix it.
Hassen, I have to stop you there because we have to go for a break. But after this break, we're going to be asking the question, compromising of journalists. And it still remains under a huge microscope when you see the genocide that is currently happening in Gaza. When you look across media, a lot of different angles that have been taken. And this is happening while people are still being killed. Journalists are still being murdered in Gaza. My conversation with Hassen continues after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Hassen Lorgat from the Palestine Solidarity Alliance. Hassen, within your article, you've mentioned that the Citizen wrote to a campaign group affirming that, quote unquote, I'd like to follow it up with a full staff member meeting to explain the decision as well as to make sure that there are no doubts. So this is the thing that caught my eye. The Citizen will no longer send anyone on sponsored trips to Israel. Right. We can take the Citizen and we can put it one side. But it doesn't stop many of the lobby groups here in South Africa from approaching other media houses. How do we keep those checks and balances, especially given that Israel's back is against the wall, given its genocide in Gaza and also the annexation that is currently happening at the West Bank? And they really are trying hard to paint a positive picture from their side.
Listen, the true position that I hold in the time of a genocide, as we see now, where journalists, children, mothers, largely children and women, are killed with such impunity, medical people targeted. There's no one spared there, but it seems that the messengers are being targeted, and we expect a little bit more solidarity from those whose job is to produce narratives, explanations to people. You know, the other day, there was an attack where 6 journalists were killed, an attack in the Nasser medical complex. You know, these journalists, I mean, you know, I just wanted to name some of them. Hussam al-Masri, right? Maryam Abu Daga, Muhammad Salama, Muaz Abu Taha, Ahmed Abu Aziz. All of these were killed deliberately, targeted in a tent. Now, where's the compassion of the journalists? Now, in this moment, and I've said it elsewhere, when a rapist does this dastardly deed of violating a woman or child, you don't ask at that moment, why did you do it? That's something for therapists and anthropologists and others to go interview them in jail afterwards. Our aim is to stop it at that moment, arrest the perpetrator, make sure there's justice. And this is what we need to do. We need to call for an end to the killings, an end to the genocide. Food, water, everything to enter. And the courage and strength of Palestinians to be reaffirmed so they can make decisions about their own liberation. But at present, they're annihilating a people, and we're quibbling about is this a genocide or not. It is most televised. We see it every day. No one can deny it. Yet, Israeli propaganda, Hasbara, tries to make us realize it's not happening. But people are not being fooled. The world is not being fooled. And this is where we're at now. So, you know, they may want to go to another funder. And what the press ombudsman said is a very low bar. They don't say, do not take money from somebody, right? They say, declare it if you take money. So you can say, I took this money from the mafia, etc. Then we as a citizen reading the paper, we can't read this crap, it's one-sided, or we don't like it, it's not fair, it's no ethics, there's no fact-checking, etc. We can make up our mind. So it's not a high bar, it's a low bar. But I think in a time of a genocide, we need to ask journalists to unite and call for the end to the bloodletting, the killing of Palestinians as if, as if they don't exist as human beings, the impunity. I mean, this is really, we don't know why we get up in the morning when we allow such a thing to happen. Why the Muslim countries surrounding Gaza and Palestine occupied, why is it that they allow this? Where's the frontline states like we had in South Africa? We had the frontline states around South Africa demanding certain sanctions be taken against the perpetrator of violence in our region. And of course, they would raise in Botswana, raids in Matola, people would attack people. But this is the price you pay for solidarity. But if the neighboring countries, the Ummah there, go into hiding, we are in real problems.
Hassen, I had a conversation with the Committee to Protect Journalists on Monday. And one of the discussions or the questions I asked is, of course, in journalism, and I spent 4 years at the University of Johannesburg studying it. And of course, the two sides to a story. And I've done so, and I've tried my best, especially since the start of the genocide. It became very difficult, though, when you see what Israel is doing, when you see them targeting journalists, when you see the murders occurring, it makes it very difficult to say, but how do you speak to an Israeli representative when all you know what they're going to say is Hamas, or they're going to go ahead and point out some ridiculous comment, which makes the argument very difficult to go through. And when you look at the press code, and when you look at, and you mentioned it, it allows them to say, please declare who funded you. It doesn't say, do not take funding from a certain organization. As media in South Africa, we are a bit under a cloud, aren't we? That you can get lobby groups that say, go to a certain country, and I'm going to mention it. Let's go to Israel, and all you have to do is say there's no apartheid that's happening because you're in Israel, and you just ignore what's currently happening in the occupied West Bank and Gaza. Come home, write a nice article, done.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised that Johan Retief, whom I've never met, but I quoted in my disputes the last 2-3 months, he wrote Decoding the Code, and he made it so clear why journalists shouldn't hide when they're apologizing, like the Citizen and the Sunday Times are doing. They shouldn't hide, shouldn't put it in small print, they should be upfront, So he wrote that very clearly. And when Muslim Views did an interview with him, or he wrote an op-ed, he was blatant. He recognized that what was happening there was not what humans can endure, and he agreed with the argument that we were putting forward. I think the both-sidism for me, and I've got to disagree with traditional journalism. Journalists are committed to accuracy, fairness, and just reporting. The other side cannot come and give you hasbara or lies or try and spin or try and change it. You must look at the hasbara strategy. First, they'll deny, no, we didn't kill Shireen Abu Akleh. Oh, it was the Palestinians. And then, so people who listen to that, then later on, 2-3 months out, oh no, sorry, we made a mistake. Right? That is not, you're being played. Journalists should not be played, right? And this is why I thought I didn't want to isolate Johan Retief. And I quote in this article Joe Tolwe, who in 2007 already said, and I really think it's such a beautiful quote. He said, our greatest expression, our fight for freedom of expression is defended by the Constitution, right? And the media's duty is to assist, to inform the public. But then he says, the greatest protection one will have against anybody who wants to assail the press is the extent in which we live this code. We live this code, right? Therefore, it should become part of our lives and part of our practice. The Constitution plus honest practice of our press code are the ones that were going to protect us in these very wild days that we are going through. He could have written it yesterday. or the last 2 years. He wrote it in 2007 on the 30th anniversary of Black Wednesday.
One final question, Hassen. Living the code, and you've mentioned and you've quoted Johan Retief, who I have tried to get on at this moment, and I haven't had any success, but Joe Tlole. And when we speak of press, and Hassen, you would know it quite well because you lived in the days of apartheid. It came under fire. Whether it was black journalists, Indian journalists, colored journalists, even our white compatriots who stood up against the National Party, who said, we're not going to peddle in your lies anymore. We are not going to peddle in your propaganda anymore. We're going to write it for what it is. And when we see this current genocide occurring, when we see the annexation of the occupied West Bank, surely we as the media, and I mentioned we as the media, need to look at ourselves and say, how can we sit here and allow this propaganda to be peddled, even if it's in or within our very own country, from these certain groups? Hassen, where are we in terms of that? Because surely this cannot continue for long while deaths are occurring and our fellow media colleagues are being slaughtered the way they are in Gaza.
You know, I'm a Lens Township guy, right? So, I mean, Ekowa and others were our heroes. You know, they were there holding the torch. I mean, Ekowa, you know, Jubi Mayat, lived on the other side of Lens. These were people from there working with Utolwe, Joe Tolwe, with John Kolane and people like that. So those were the Black Journalists Forums, Moasa and others. Those were, of course, I was in different unions, but we know we looked up to these intellectual giants. So the tradition was one of struggle that they had. They said they're first members of the community before they are journalists, basically affirming their humanity. And it's this sadness that I have that the Sunday Times, which is edited by black, beautiful people, actually takes the more conservative views. And it is the two other papers edited by so-called white South Africans have actually tried to come to meet the party. Biz News are not members of the press council, but they wrote up front that we didn't say, they just said, well, this trip was sponsored. They didn't say they were alerted by me. Well, that's okay. But they said up front afterwards when they were alerted. Citizen, you've read what they've done.
Yeah.
In fact, what the Sunday Times have done, have put people like Dr. Manjra and others who wrote on the 15th of May to them. They've made him go round and round, will reply to you, and they never ever replied to him. Until recently, they never ever replied to him to say, sorry, we never replied. But they strung him along until I took the matter to the press council. So they mustn't tell us that, you know, that they are very diligent and, you know, stuff like that. Clearly, they knew they were going to string this out. My final point is, on Power FM, the editor called in, the editor of the Sun Times, Makudu Sefara, and he said to Chris Vick that they forgot to put down who sponsored them. So Chris asked, what? You forgot? This is cardinal. This is cardinal. It is
Hassen,
what journalism is about.
Hassen, I have to stop you there. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Always a pleasure having you on. Jazakallah so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That's Hassen Lorgat, member of the Palestine Solidarity Alliance. After the break, are we going to be discussing South Africa, the United States? Where are we in terms of the relations? Brooke Spector is my guest after this break. Do stay tuned.